Let me welcome Professor N.K. Ganguly, eminent medical scientist, and he has been in several key positions, including as Director General ICMR, where I also started my career when Professor Ramalinga Swamy was the DG. Professor Ganguly's achievements and honors, it's a long list. I do not think we have time to read out all those here. I mean, close to 800 papers and produced 130 PhDs. And it's a remarkable thing. I think I should mention significant in the list is that the nation honored him with a Padma Bhushan in recognition of his outstanding contribution to medical science. Well, I should say this program actually is intended to introduce him, his life, his work, his contributions, and his views on some of the current issues. Let me start the conversation straight away. Dr. Ganguly, you entered the research field at a time when the facilities were not comparable to the present standards, especially lab facilities, and it requires a lot of tenacity and commitment for carrying out the type of work you did. I know some of my friends used to be 24/7 in labs. I mean, they used to sleep in the labs. I just wanted to know, how did you manage? Can you trace your experience for the benefit of the younger generation of public health scholars and scientists?
Yeah, actually, this is a very good question, Dr. Nar. Firstly, thank you for this opportunity to be with many young people. At my age, it is a privilege. I had no desire to go in research in the beginning. I had come from Pakistan, and my mother sent me with a neighbor to the school. They asked that which class I was reading, and he said, I don't know, ask him some questions and put him in any class where he fits. So they put me 2 classes above. At that time we didn't have any papers. We came almost bareback, and that was in a sense a boon, and in a sense a disappointment for the family also, because my family up to this generation, everyone is a physician. Not of my generation, 2 generations away from me also, nobody has done any other thing. Very uninteresting family where everyone is a duplicate person. So I then, when I did my intermediate, I was supposed to go to medical field. So, but at that time, 17 years was the minimum age when you can enter. So I entered with chemistry honors in the Lucknow University. And that changed my life. I started as a chemist, but then I was pushed to the medical field and did my MBBS. And after that, I came to Chandigarh to do my MD in medicine. That was a family desire. And MBBS also, at those days, we had a paper on chemistry. These days it is not there, but in my time, there was a paper in chemistry. So I came to Chandigarh to do my MD in medicine, and I met a guy who was named as Dr. S.C. Agarwal. He headed many institutes. His last assignment was Sher Kashmir, but before that he was in PGI Chandigarh, and then he became of the Jipman Pondicherry. He became professor there. So this guy had discovered diphtheria toxin, mechanism of action of diphtheria toxin in Oxford. He was a Nuffield fellow. And that was actually how you, the mechanism of action was the interruption of the protein synthesis. So I am talking of 1965. So when I landed in Chandigarh, some or other in the evening, we met in a dinner without knowing him at all. And he then brainwashed me that this is a new subject. You should do it. It is very, very interesting. All the Nobel laureates have got this particular background, and you will have an opportunity. So he coaxed me in writing an application for admission, and next day I got that you are admitted. And this was a shock to me, but somehow or other his brainwashing was very, very successful. So when I entered the first time, they said you are the first student. Everyone else who had come has run away within 1 week. So 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 why are you here? So but anyway, the first day in my life, he he had a Warburg instrument. This was a giant. There you measure the respiratory pathway of the microorganism. This was never in a curriculum of any microbiology course. So we put up beds in the room, and then we put up the Warburg, and we measured at least two different pathways for the respiratory pathways of mycobacteria. Then he taught us that. So he taught us the metabolism of a microorganism, the first teaching. The second teaching was this, that he said that there are plasmas who can multiply, and you can interrupt the cell wall synthesis, the muramyl peptide and then acylyl glucosamine by the PARC pathway. And if you use vancomycin and penicillin and put them on a hypertonic environment, you will then find that a post-take appears like mycoplasma is obtained, and then they can survive and they can cause many chronic infections in the body. So he taught me how the cell wall synthesis happens, how do you interrupt, and how you make that. Then he taught us how to make ribosomal preparation. It was color used to be red, and how you set up an experiment for protein synthesis, and how you interrupt protein synthesis, what was transfer RNA, messenger RNA, etc. Everything he taught us in the test tube. And his next teaching was that he made a he at that time DNA was just discovered. So he taught us how to extract DNA, how to make a preparation of that, how to measure that. And he also taught us the mutation. So Lederberg's famous velvet experiment, he taught us. He also taught us what are the auxotrophs. So all of these he taught us during those days in 1965 to 67. And one of his acts was that he said that in the PhD, the main thing was that how the acid hydrolases of the mycobacteria ultimately make them survive in the macrophages. The entire pathway was he gave as a part of the thesis to me after my MD. And also he gave me one more lesson there, that he said that you establish immunology. Somebody said you establish parasitology, somebody mycology. So he told me that you establish immunology in the department. I said, but who will teach me? He said that let us both study and teach each other. And so we started studying and teaching each other, the teacher and the taught, to learn immunology as a subject. And he said, then let us make a vaccine. So we made the cholera vaccine. And he said that at that time there was no ethics committee. He said that let us bring this vaccine and challenge ourselves with the 569B. This is a very dangerous organism, 569B. It has a residual residual cholera toxin. So I didn't know anything about, but I couldn't say no to him because he was also drinking the vaccine with me. So we drank the vaccine and we challenged ourselves. Nothing happened to us. Before that, we had set up that how you can do a correct counting of the organism and how do you set up a fibrocidal antibody assays. All of this we had established and we measured these antibodies and then we published around 6 papers. We continued 6 papers back to back. But in my own mind, I didn't believe this work. And as soon as he left, I stopped this work. But later on, when I was ISEMA DG, there was a DOMI project and the Shankol, which now these guys are making the this the Sanofi guys are making in the it was Haraprasad Reddy's institute at that time, and we did the trial and we published it in Lancet, and this was a really very good experience that this is now the only cholera vaccine in the world which is being used in Bangladesh, in Africa, and every place. We could have got although I got some glory by being part of the clinical trial and ultimately manufacturing in India and developing policy, but ultimately this gave me lot of satisfaction that my teacher at that time taught me so many things. He also taught me to measure respiratory syncytial viruses. That was something at that time almost unknown. And when I was visiting once United States, somebody told me that I know you. I said, how do you know me? He was the dean of the Johns Hopkins. So he said that I discovered the respiratory syncytial viruses. Yours was the second paper. And I didn't know mine was the second paper. It was not my paper. It was my teacher's paper. And I used to assist him only. It was his idea, his paper, and I was his assistant. But then this was a very nice journey for me that I had such a futuristic teacher who didn't teach me through the textbooks, but he taught me through something very new, very topical, and gave me a thinking which was futuristic. So this particular journey continued when I went to Japan in a fellowship in Beacon, which is an infectious disease institute, and I joined the immunology department there because I was supposed to be an immunologist. And my chemistry actually was came very, very useful there. It never left my life ever. So there, all the complement and immunoglobulin guys were working. Like the person.
Sir, you are muted.
Sorry, it got muted. I don't know whether what part was missed. But anyway, I landed in Japan and in an immunology department, but it was essentially a chemistry department. So there were the chemists who had discovered C prime Q. His name was Yonemasu, and it has a collagen structure. Then there was a person who has discovered C prime 9. His name was Inoue, Kozo Inoue, and there was one person who has discovered C prime 3. His name was Nishioka. They were all chemists, and they then asked me that you do something. So there was another area where they were looking at flagellin. So they asked me that And there was another person known as Uttumi. He has discovered the structure of the IgM. With all of them were trained in United States, and they're what they have learned. So I said that I don't want to do this. So they said that, well, then why not? But we don't have time. You can join a team and do work. I said, no, I want to do my own work, and I have come here. I want to work on the complement pathways. And they had all biological assays as well as the chemical assays. So, and this was an enzyme assay, and you needed mathematics. I always ran away from mathematics, and mathematics never left me ever in my life. It pursued me. So one of the things I learned that biologists need to learn mathematics, because mathematics is one of the mother subjects, and whether you measure blood flow, whatever you do, this is something. If you do enzyme reaction, calculate Cmax, calculate when the enzyme reaction will end. You have to do all of those things. It was not a time when the calculators were there, nor it was a time where there was a computer, not it was a time when the RT-PCR or anything, even ELISA was not discovered at that time. So I was given a slide rule to calculate, or they were all calculating with an abacus. So I had never used abacus. I had never used slide rule before in my life. So I learned them and did my, so after some times, then I said, then I'm going back. So then they got very nervous. They said, okay, you make your own project and let us do this project. We will help you. So I started writing project by going into the literature. At that time, there was no computer. So go to library, take off. And anything I write and come, they said that, well, this is already known. This is not a new thing. So I learned that from the books are about 10 years old. Journals are about 3 to 4 years old. So if you really want to do something very, very new, you have to see something out of the box of the people who are working in the laboratories around the world and get some ideas out of that to formulate your own ideas. So that was a very big lesson. Another lesson
Ganguly,
which I learned while I was working there, that write down everything in the notebook. One day, I was petrified when my column froze. There were crystals in my column. So I didn't know what wrong I have done. So they said that bring your book. So I brought my book out. And you know that if you are using both sodium salts in the buffer, and if you exceed a particular molarity, it will freeze. So many times you take one sodium salt and another potassium salt. So buffer is one of the really art in the kitchen art which you need to learn. So this gave me a very big teaching, that note down everything, even the piece of paper. If you are measuring a torsion balance, you do that. I also learned during that time in the buffer making that it is not only the molarity which is important, it is ionicity also, which is very, very important. The ionic strength, because if ionic strength goes wrong, you may not be, it may not be possible to get you the proteins. And then at that time, the protein separation on the gels came up and all those science came up. And while working, I could learn that, but I will end my training period by relating two more stories, that I went to the UK, and again I landed in an immunology department, but in a clinical gastroenterology department. So in the clinical gastroenterology department, they wanted to look at the interferon was discovered, and they wanted to work on interferon in treatment of the hepatitis virus, particularly chronic active hepatitis. So I made the interferon myself. This was a cell macrophage cell line in which I triggered it with vesicular stomatitis virus, purified the virus away, purified the interferon. This was done in a huge columns which touched the almost the ceiling. I went to Wellcome Laboratories in Kent, and there I purified it, looked at whether it had endotoxin or not, and whether it has any other viruses or other material or not. And I had the interferon. Then we had to set up an assay. The assay was at that time only assay which was not, because it was not time for ELISA. The assay was FAR technique. So take actinomycin D, you externally label the DNA and add the patient serum. The immunoglobulin will attach to the DNA if you have the antibodies to DNA, viral DNA, which is the core DNA of the hepatitis B virus. And then you precipitate it with ammonium sulfate and you take the count. And then but the tragedy was this, that you will not know whether the infection is going away or it is not there, because they never measured IgM. So they said set up an assay. So I set up an IgM assay. It was like IgM core, which comes down. It was a very, very difficult assay because there were at least 4 or 5 variables. And one of the variables was antibodies to erythrocytes. Antibodies to erythrocytes, erythrocyte wall has got Frostman's antigens. So if you make just antibodies by injecting erythrocytes, you will get non-specific results. So what you did, you created a host cells, and handy came one of the books which is out of circulation now. That was Cabot and Mayer's the Handbook of Immunochemistry. Last print was 1965. After that, there was no print which was made there. So they had taught this there, that how do you make with the host RBC cells, how do you make antibodies which will not react to frost. So the number of RBCs, how do you measure exact number? Whatever you spin or whatever you do, there will be some amount of water. It was a very, very difficult assay, but since I was very good in complement, I could then set up this assay. And we then did our trial. This was one of the first trials. There was parallel trial went on in Stanford. And we successfully published several papers in very good journals, including Lancet and other things. And this was a real good lesson to me in one sense, that that time the person with whom I was working in UK, I worked with Ralph Wright, I worked with Deborah Doniak and Sheila Sherlock. All were very good gastroenterologists and hepatologists. So there, when the results were very good and encouraging in a certain percentage of subjects, so the person with whom I was working, he said that, well, Ganguly, the results are too good. Will you teach it to a technician? And so I said, okay, I will teach it to a technician. So I taught to a technician, but then I told my wife, pack your bags. If the results don't come, then we go home. So, but that technician was much better. She has a golden hand. She had much better hands than me. She did it perfectly and the results could be repeated. So it gave me a very good lesson that if you really get something very, very unique and something very new, somebody else should repeat it so that it is reproducible. And otherwise you get a black face if you publish something and then nobody is able to repeat it, and you get into trouble. So this was again a very good teaching which I got during my career. And and then in the UK, I joined Keith Peters' laboratory where Peter Latchman was working. Peter Latchman was the complement expert in the Europe, and he had set up very nice assays there. So when I came back to PGI, I could do all those assays, and I also worked with Tony Allison, who was a father of the cell-mediated immune reaction. So I learned that from him, and there was a little bit of biotechnology which was being set up there, and there was some seeds of biotechnology which I learned, and so and then I was trained in Germany in Bernard Maische's lab, and there I could set up a culture of the beating heart cells and could measure the calcium and others. So I learned what was a cell physiology, what was a patch clamp technique, and how do you study the cell signaling, and how do you measure the calcium and other pathways which are crucial for the bodily function. So by the time I ended, and while I was in UK, I also fulfilled my mother's dream by getting a fellowship, which was so I started with MD microbiology, but then I got a fellowship in UK, and then I did an immunology in Japan. So I got rounded up there. But when I was in PGI, I realized that there will be that or that just laboratory and clinical sense will not take you anywhere. You need to go to people. So I got a training for a public health in Atlanta, uh, both in CDC and MORE, and got a qualification also. So this came up very handy for me in my later period, because one of the things which happened that while I was in PGI, the community medicine person who was Vijay Kumar, who was very good, he joined WHO. So this department became orphan, and the person on whom the mantle fell was Sharad Iyengar. So Sharad Iyengar came to me. I was working with the Vijay Kumar when he was there on the global control of the lower respiratory tract infection by giving co-trimexazole to everyone, and I was measuring the resistant pattern with Vijay Kumar. So when he left, so Sharad was working with me. So Sharad told me that, well, Dr. Ganguly, I don't want to work with the government anymore because there is no freedom here. I will set up an NGO. And he left. And he set up a very successful NGO in Rajasthan. He was a son of an IS officer, but very, very dedicated person. And then Rajesh Kumar joined the PGI Public Health School, Public Health Department, Community Medicine Department. So it fell on me to keep them in the money. So I had a AG fund on community control of rheumatic heart disease, a persistent diarrhea project. So I kept on getting proposals, projects there to keep the community medicine department floating, and so got a very good grinding in the public health. So much so that in the persistent diarrhea thing, we were measuring the vitamin A, which I was measuring through HPLC and retinol binding protein and retinoic acid and others. So even if you gave a mega dose, the person remained same. So I had to set up a physiologic method of measuring this. And I took a retinal swab, and if you saw that there was no sheet of the epithelial cells, and the goblet cell which produce mucus were not there, there was a vitamin A deficiency, even though retinoic acid will be same. So this was actually David Sack, who was in John Hopkins and was also working in Bangladesh. He found that this was, and no expensive thing, it was done on ordinary paper. And so he sent a person to learn this. So then I thought that whatever you really learn, if you could translate into somewhere. And the same thing, and I set up a genetic, while in the working with the public health community control, we set up, I set up a system which was, which could measure a genetic marker of those who will get rheumatic fever and who will not get, because rheumatic fever, normally streptococcal infection is there in about 16% of people. Only 0.3% of them get rheumatic fever. 0.3% of them get rheumatic heart disease. This happens in 5 to 15 years age group. So there, it was thought that there will be a genetic predisposition. So I set up a method and developed a monoclonal antibody set, which could be used in the field to measure this. And all the major people from around the world used to visit us. So once Dr. John Zabrisky's group, they visited us, and my student who was doing PhD flew away the next day over there. But anyway, we then did this, and we had a very good collaboration with Minnesota University, and we did this nice work over there, and the papers were published, and this actually helped in developing of the vaccine for the group A streptococci. So this was again something which was new, which was set up and interesting. But my thought was that whatever you do in the laboratory, we should be able to use in the field. That has been my dictum all
So,
my life, and this was the part of the training and how I progressed in the. My last few words in the career is that I almost could really do change 4 departments in the PGI Chandigarh. I got a professor of microbiology position there. I got professor in the gastroenterology, a professor in parasitology, professor of immunology I got in Delhi. And then I got professor of experimental medicine, which was a very good department where there was a gastroenterologist, cardiologist, physiologist, neurophysiologist, nutritionist, molecular biologist. It was a cauldron where you put everyone there. And this department became very famous department. There are 400 people who were working. I myself had a grant of about 10 crores in those days in that. And we had set up a sophisticated equipment facility, which was a central facility. And we had everything, and we also set up an animal facility with a primate facility over there. So this was all good, but when I left that place, I converted that into Department of Biotechnology. So we actually learned every few years as the science moved, that place has now become Department of Regenerative Medicine, and Dr. Vivekanand Jha, who was trained in Oxford, ultimately headed that. So in the life, you need to really move through. And there was one good thing which happened during my time, that you had to compete for every position. You never got an automatic system. So the last story is a very telling story. I was opposing the Dhar committee, that is automatic promotion. I said, why don't you do TFIR system or a US system, that you put in an application, even if you are very young, 40 years old or 38 years old, you put up that you deserve professorship. And there will be a committee who will look at it. If you are if you deserve professorship, you will be given professorship. But in US, etc., there was a rule that if you don't get selected, you will have to leave the place. So people did it with a lot of responsibility. But TFIR, this was a system, and your position went into a pool, and it became a general pool. So there was no stagnation there. But I was defeated in this. So somebody challenged that you you had an easy time, you got so many promotions. And that's why you are saying. So at that time, another position of professor, Shiv, had come vacant. So I made a challenge that I am putting an application. Anybody of you compete, or anybody of you prevent from my getting this position. And I appeared for that and I got selected. And then the director of that time came to me and told me that, please, you have such a nice department in experimental medicine. Why you will make that orphan? You come and join. I said, no, give me the appointment letter and then I will consider. So he had to go back to governing body and then he gave me appointment letter and then I left it. But I wanted to put a lesson to the faculty, and the competition is always good. And if you have a self-confidence in yourself, you could really move forward to this. And one of the major asset which you earn in life are your students. They they are now all around the world. My students are all around the world, and they have occupied director's position, professor's position. Every one of them are employed. There's 130 is a old biodata. I actually guided 160 subjects. My current time, there is only one PhD student because I'm touching 80. I do not want to link up another PhD student after this. The person is working on checkpoint inhibitors. And there's a simple question that when will you, it's a very expensive treatment. So there are nivolumab, pembro, which are PD-1 actor, then there are CCL4 inhibitors, and all of these are being used, frightfully expensive. Only 30 to 40% of patients, they respond, and others don't respond. So if you knew right from the beginning who will respond, you will then benefit somebody, and you will make another person, prevent another person from being pauper. So we started to set up biomarkers in which we could really do this and predict this. So first thing we did about 25 immunologic panels, phenotypic panels, and about 64 cytokines, and it was a very big analytical part of this in which we found out few very good indicators. And then we did a complete metabolomics, complete proteomics. We did the NGS for doing the mutations, mutation analysis and others works, and microbiome to know that whether the microbiome also make the immune system, push the immune system to some place and make the checkpoint inhibitors better or not. So it's a journey which, if you are in the lab, so my teacher never allowed us to guide till I became associate professor, a PhD student. These days, I see assistant professors taking 4 PhD students, stop going to the lab, stop using their own hands, and I can tell them that they will become bookish and they will lose the knowledge and they will not be able to do anything. Today, I am still eating and living comfortably because even today I work in the lab and I can help many industry, many others in solving small things which get stuck. So this is so this was the a little bit of, not little bit of, too much of the my journey, and I wanted you to take on a roller coaster ride with me to show that ultimately it is, we worked on a very low salaries during those days. I don't regret it. In later life, you earn money if you have skills, and you can never lack an employment, however old you are, wherever you are. You don't have to beg for an employment if you really make yourself strong and acquire skills, because everything asks you that what you can do. You should be able to do something which is useful. or which could be translatable.
Thank you,
So
Dr. Ganguly. I think that was a very interesting biographical essay. I mean, I should say. I mean, and your statement that community is important. I think it's extremely significant from a public health point of view. But we are also interested in knowing your interest in translational research, because you are also an expert from the lab to the clinical side to the uh, health services to the people. I think that kind of a channel, I mean, is it still very important at the moment? Because I mean, I'm sure that the present context of COVID and all that, uh, so important. I think what is we are interested in knowing your views on this.
yeah, actually, it is very important that whatever you do, your thesis should not lie on the library shelves or should not end in a paper. Recently, the Utrecht University has created a new system of assessment. This system is this, that impact factor will not determine your promotion or your hiring. What will determine is that how within your own community, that is your peers and your own colleagues, you are valued, and how your work has really made an impact. So whether you have published in Nature or Cell or Immunity, it really doesn't matter. You may have published in Gut or Hepatology or Journal of Infectious Diseases or something, but if the paper has made some kind of a relevance, it is of importance. It doesn't mean that you don't do blue sky research. One of the blue sky research or the basic research is important, but ultimately if you have a eyes or nose that it should turn to something good, it becomes better. Like, and sometimes it is like, I will go from the public health importance. One of the first thing which I helped in going to the market was Shanta Biotech's hepatitis B vaccine. It was a recombinant vaccine, so DST sent us there, and we saw that the guy has copied it. It was a Pichia pastoris expression, and that time the ESAT of Pichia pastoris was not known. Saccharomyces cerevisiae was known, and so that was the basic thing where this was being made. So we just allowed them to do it. We said we needed the first recombinant vaccine. So it was made, but today I kick myself that we didn't advise them appropriately. So India made this vaccine, and then Bharat Biotech made, but the Serum Institute made it in again in another yeast, which was the Vansunella, and Bharat Biotech was making it in Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but later on they stole I will not say stole, they started doing the Pichia pastoris expression also. So the Shanta Biotech got very upset about, that's a different story. This investigation came to my lap, and I had to investigate that who did what there. But I ultimately saved that. I didn't want the two companies to get into litigation, and I ultimately saved the day on that. But 25 years we didn't use this vaccine. This vaccine, every one of our neighbors used it. They brought down the hepatitis B infection. They brought down the hepatocellular carcinoma. They brought down everything, but we didn't use it because we didn't know. We didn't answer. You may have a product, but to know that, to use that, you may, and to get into a policy, you need to make some major decisions, major data. So we didn't have tech transfer places. The Boston University has, the Harvard has, you have a technology assessment institutes. We do not have any of those. So here there were 4 questions which we didn't have answer. Is the vertical transmission only thing, or horizontal transmission also happens? It used to happen because of bad injection practices. So you had strong concentration of these infections around. The second thing was this, that how do you give 3 doses? One, you have to get into, you have to create a combo, otherwise you can't. The least combo was a diphtheria and tetanus combination with this, and the better one was you also have HIV antigen, and later on, if you could have, you could add polio, you could get a hexavalent, so you could really make it move. So we didn't know, we knew how to deliver the first dose, and in some cases the second, we didn't know how to deliver the third dose. So the combo was an answer. We didn't really teach them. Then, because of the assays, we didn't really set up assays and the diagnostics in our place. Previously, those who were early of my age, they used to buy antibodies, take antigens, create your own system of assays and do the assay. But then Abbott, etc., they purchased all the reagents, and you couldn't make these self-controlled assays. You had to really buy them, and that also was something which we had not invested on the diagnostics. Thirdly, this is also, if you give to children, it is okay, but pregnant mothers need it, the adults need it, and they need it. They might just need hepatitis B injection. Then do not need a combo, because if you are going through hemodialysis, if you are going a risky profession, you may need this particular part. We didn't have answer to this. So all of these answers had to be found before we really used it. And we could have found the answers very quickly because our neighbors had those answers. If we have something in Bangladesh, the same is in Eastern India. So we have something in Pakistan. So Zulfikar Bhutto and others, Anita Zaidi and others in Aga Khan had these answers. We could have really looked at it and could have translated and used it. So in translation, when you do, many times you should not really reinvent the wheel. You really quickly move towards the translation and use that. If you take 25 years, and that was happening with every vaccine, we have changed now. The Gavi said that 5 years should be the maximum, and there you need to move. And we really moved on that. Our companies, vaccine companies, are doing it. They are not depending on academia anymore. They are buying technology from wherever it is available, and they are producing vaccine, and we have become a very strong vaccine hub in the world. The
So
second
Ganguly,
thing,
in that, there is an interesting question. Maybe if I can interrupt you at this moment. When we talk about the vaccine, so you were also part of an interesting trial in Calcutta using the typhoid vaccine, and your team could demonstrate 80% efficacy in young children, who are largely affected by that. But again, then we had very clear science in front of us, and we have a huge burden of typhoid. But why was that it not translated into action? Still, we do not have a clear policy, as you rightly mentioned in between. The policy, getting translated into policy. Where is that block that have you seen? Because you have worked for many decades.
Yeah, there is a gap in research and policy in India. This gap is huge. There was a vice president of the Puerto Rico. She created a triangle. The first triangle was, top of the triangle was knowledge generation. And the second one was knowledge management. And then it was translation to a product preparation. and the product could then have to be financed, and the other part of architecture should be the ethics and equity. And that creates a public will. And if the people want it, there was, I don't know, those who are older might have seen a comedy series known as Lucy. Whatever Lucy wanted, Lucy got it. So one of the things is that if you have a product, people should want it, they should like it. And so to that, you need social and behavioral scientists, you need NGOs. This particular part was lacking in India. They didn't really exist in our scientific paradigm. We were not trained for that. So we were not trained for data analysis or data crunching. Now we are getting trained for that. We were not trained for data sharing. And really looking, our international health was very, very poor. And
I think these are like very interesting points, because I'm like, I have been reading one of your latest article on artificial intelligence and big data, which you have recently written. So there you mentioned about the role of big data that is going to be playing out, and when the gap between the intellect and the level of knowledge between practitioners is coming down, and it's more the role of compassion and empathy and emotional care, which is going to be more relevant in coming days, because you have all the artificial intelligence and big data which support your clinical decisions. So do you think that this is a time for a paradigm shift in the medical education as well, because you have worked for a long time in medical education sector?
Yeah, artificial intelligence is very, like we are doing a lot of COVID sequencing, only 25,000. The UK is doing 6 lakhs of that. And I was part of establishing GISED. GISED is today one of the major repository of the sequencing. Yeah. And so you need to have, you need to be steeped in epidemiology and public health and statistics. These are, everyone knows Partha Majumdar. He was a statistician, but became the director of a genomic laboratory. So ultimately, if you lack this public health perspective, you can't really relate it to people. You can't really use it effectively in diagnosing, tracking, containment, creating hotspots, finding a meaning out of that. So that artificial intelligence work was lacking in this, which was published. Was okay, it was looking good in the piece of paper, but it was lacking in that perspective. So there are artificial intelligence guys who look at images, who find out a meaning of, who look at huge amount of data, make predictions and others, but they need to be validated. It is same as the bioinformatic people. They are creating in silico analysis. But these in silico analysis need to be validated to find out that whether you can use it in actual practice or not. So the new science is coming up, but the basic science remains same. And statistics is a knowledge which everyone need to master. Not only go to statistician while you are planning, you need to do that. Once in PGI, Dr. Chutani, when he was a director, all of us flunked. It was early 60s. Statistics was not practiced. All of us flunked our interview and were not promoted. Only one person, faculty, was promoted this year. His name was Dr. K.C. Das. Everyone else failed because we couldn't answer what is the P test, what is the T values, what are the SDs. We didn't answer any of those. So we went back to classes and started learning statistics. Otherwise, next year there was no promotion. So
today interestingly, this is also
so these values are important if you really want to move towards that. I will give you a few more examples of translation. Translation, for translation, you need to fill in the gaps of knowledges. You may have a product, you may have something. I will give you a very good example that we don't have, even now, we don't have good quality water to most of our people, and we don't have the access to water. Huge number of people in Rajasthan and others, a lady can carry not more than 10 kilos. She had to carry sometimes 25 kilos, and she have to travel 20 miles and others to get that water. So there should be an answer. So there were 4 or 5 technologies which developed for pure water, which was not RO water, which could be used by anyone. So one of the technologies was this, that you take 25 liters of jerry can, you put 5 drops of hypochlorite in the night, although halide are not very good thing for purification. But if you put it in night, in the morning, it doesn't smell. And this water is free of bacteria. This could be used and very tested technology. So we took it to Kirtinagar slums, taught for about 2 months, videos, this and that, and we created a bottle which was 250 milliliter water bottle, which was 12 rupees. So a family could use it for a month, and it cost 10 rupees. 2 rupees went to shopkeeper, and a family could fully get in 50 paise fully good potable water without any issue. Nobody actually used it because there was one flaw over there, that in India, people don't use plastic jerry cans to store water. They use earthen pots to store water. And if you store water, if you dip your hand, you will again infect the water. So you need to put in a tap, or there should be a narrow neck in that, so that when you take out that water. So this technology is there, but it went to waste. There is another technology, that you put a bamboo stick or somewhere, put a tin plate over there, put 5 bottles of water in the sun for about 5 to 6 hours. The ultraviolet rays purifies the viruses, kills everything. Bacteria goes through pasteurization. And the end, you have pure water where you have not spent a penny. And this is a time-tested technology. Why people don't use it? The third technology is Rita Colwell's technology. What she did, she folded in Bangladesh, she folded a sari, cotton sari, not a polythene or other sari, into 5 folds. And then she put this on the in a pot of around a water pot, and put water through that, and it was a pure water. It was validated everywhere. So there are, like in Chennai, etc., there are those power plants and the sea level. So if you use the waters to do the turbine, they get evaporated, and you could catch that water and supply to people. It again doesn't cost any money. So we have technologies, but people are not using those things because they don't see any benefit out of that, because they just don't want it. So you need to communicate with people. When I created the miltofosine for leishmania, which you could orally take, we had to work with the musahars, the rat catchers. They didn't understand our language. We don't have those 14 or 16 semester health communication classes. We have a mass communication, which is very, very different. Musahas didn't know. They were to get a free house, they were to get subsidies if they took medicine, but they ultimately didn't do it because they didn't understand. But this particular thing, with the circumstances, we could turn into a policy. The policy was that Nepal, Bangladesh, and India signed an agreement for elimination of leishmaniasis. So it was a different story, but communication became very important. I attended a health communication course in Boston. In there, the four most powerful speakers, one was a town planner from the Harvard. He planned the new Palestine if it was ever available. So the mass transit, water, every housing, every small thing was planned, and it would have become a heaven if this could have been translated into a very healthy city. The second one was a musician. He had his child has died. He was a Sony Music Corporation's director. His child had died during through cancer. So he created through music a message and a hope for the cancer patients. The third one was a movie maker. The movie maker, he actually created a movie of AIDS orphan. So very hardened people like us who have seen so much death around us really didn't um, uh, got the message in such a hard way that the AIDS was controlled not by the drugs, not by the vaccine. We don't have a vaccine. It was controlled by the people themselves, not through the Michai's thing, like you scare people to death. So so in Thailand, surge came again because people said, in any case, we are going to die, then why not enjoy and die? So why do you go through privations? So ultimately, the message has become very important. And the fourth one was a linguist. He has mastery in language, and he could know the tribal languages, he knew other languages, and he created. So one of the programs which I ran in India was with the Goanese, who was a professor of music in Boston University. His name is Andre Quadros. He was a musician. He and me went to Gujarat, went to Pondicherry, and tried to improve health through music. And you will not believe it, it actually improved. So health is a very many dimension thing. And if you want to really translate, you need to translate it with community. I told you about the rheumatic heart disease thing. We went very proudly to the people and asked them that, do you like what we did here? We saved a lot of lives there. But they said, well, it was okay, but our problem is tuberculosis. So you sit in the hallowed benches. The priority setting is a very big science. It is
I
done.
think I think I think that's a very interesting position. That, I mean, I was just going through in 2018 when you came to Boston University for a mutual partnership. One of the statements that you made was like very remarkable. When two organizations decide to work together, there is a gain for both sides, and partnership should be a two-way street. So now like 12 years, 13 years down the lane, when we see new partnerships happening, what do you think of our public health leadership and our capacity building? Could we take it forward, the agenda of mutual learning and building the capacity in India?
Very nice. You have done a lot of research on me. Okay, then actually, one of the things which we know, we have a lot of excellence in India, a lot of institutes of a great potential and dimension. But these partnerships are very difficult to forge. So one of the things is how to do research in poverty or in deprivation. One of the major thing is that string the pearls. The pearls are there, create a ornament out of that. So you can wear that ornament and the pearls will complement each other. Or or join the broken bridges. The bridges are broken in different places. If you join the broken bridges, the bridges will join, then you will be able to create those partnerships. And it is always a two-way process. You just can't force two people to work together until and unless they see benefit for each other. And here you cannot be the big brother and cow down the other person, whatever humble person he is. Like I had a student, I think he was the best person whom I ever mentored. His name is G. Balkrish Nair. He is now settled in Trivandrum. And first, when I visited his lab, he was putting Vibrios on prawn, and what he was seeing that how much they enter. And that was a brilliant thing. He was a marine biologist. He was brought into Calcutta by Dr. S.C. Paul, whose wife was a Keralite. So she attracted this guy, and he came here, and his first experiment was this. And this was such a brilliant idea because Vibrios, they bloom in the plankton, and Vibrio fishery and etc. They move through the different fishes. And he tried to find out that how it is doing. The same person then discovered one 0139, the Vibrio cholera, which became a pandemic. He discovered so many things and translated so many things. But he has one very big thing going for him. People call him, he's a good man. You can work with him. He translated so many things around the world. He worked in Bangladesh. He was director of the Translation Health Science Technology Institute in here. He later on went as in WHO. When he put his, but ultimately the person had translation in his heart. Whenever he observed a phenomenon, he tried to find out that why it's happening and find an answer to that. So the translations, Health Science Technology Institute, I visited every place in the world, and myself and Dr. Bhan, who became Deputy Secretary. At that time, he was Associate Professor and I was Director General in ICMR. One day I got a shock in my life. I didn't know that I had diabetes. I was visiting my lab in PGI Chandigarh. They had brought a new analyzer. They said, sir, let us inaugurate it with your blood. So somebody drew my blood and put it there. And I found that I had diabetes. So I went into a shock that now I will not be, I'm very fond of eating. My eating will go out of the thing. I will have to gulp a lot of tablets. So Dr. Bhan was associate professor in pediatrics in AIMS. So he was also living in the Asiad village. So one day he came with a pair of shoes and told me, let us walk. And we started walking. And I could control my diabetes in that. But one thing came out of that. We started talking of establishing a translation health science technology institute. So each and every small facet, its structure, how it should be planned, was planned during that time. And when he became DBT secretary at a later stage, he established that institute. I remember I went with him to defend this. This was at that time very poor budget, which actually hampered the institute's growth. But we went to expenditure secretary and actually was able to convince them to ultimately establish it. So one of the things which happens in our country that we suboptimally fund. I was in the first grand challenge of the Gates Foundation. That was only 14 people were there. And in this 14, I found my place in there. I was the only few persons there who were not Nobel laureates. Everyone else was a Nobel laureate there. So there was a very important thing which was found for the translating, that you invited questions from people. So we got thousands and thousands and thousands of questions. So for a half an year, we started shifting from those questions to identify 14 questions, so that 14 of those questions were ultimately identified for translation. So, and then when we sat, there were few things like there were some very brilliant papers from projects from India, but they were not. Somebody did put protein in potato, but potato was not the main staple food in India, so it got rejected. But somebody in Africa, they put value in sorghum, it got funded. So the other one was that point of care diagnostics. Today you see how much point of care diagnostics came up. But this is how these were funded. These were funded like after the funding decisions were made, the Peter Singer and Abdullah Dar, this team in the Toronto University, sat with them and for 2 hours to identify any ethical roadblock which they might encounter. This doesn't happen in India. Or any equity issues which will be later on. And there were some third world collaborators, whether they will benefit or not. So this was an education. So we funded up to $64 million, one lab or other lab. Later on, Mr. Gates learned from this that don't give all the money together. Go through the various phases. If you successfully do phase 1, you move to phase 2 and then move to phase 3. But the funding was never suboptimal. Funding was adequate. So, and I saw that when there was a National Institute of Biological, when it was being set up, I was invited by then Health Secretary, who had I had just joined as DGISMR, that this is something white elephant. This was a 16 crore project. It has become 36. Then it became 64. Now it is 450 crore project. You just recommend so that we can scrap it. One building which has been built, which will do the NIB. So I then went through that and saw that this is needed. We need to be world class, and other things will not do. Japanese were providing the money, NIH was training, USFDA was training the personnel. So I said, no, it should not be scrapped. So he sent it to 4 more people and they said it should not be scrapped. So then he called me one day and said, now you have put me in this trap, you now set it up. And everyone has walked away. NIH has walked away. Japanese have walked away. Everyone. You see a glorious building there. I could convince the then expenditure secretary that a 16 crore project will be good above 500 crore project. And it was established. It is a different story how it is functioning or how it is not functioning. In the government system, there are glitches. But at least world-class facility was set up. The same thing happened when Pushpa Bhargav set up the CCMB. At least we had a world-class lab. Or Pran Talwar set up the National Institute of Immunology. We had the first glimpse of the world-class labs. So whatever we should have, it need to be world-class. It should be optimally funded. And we should have in our research, if we are going to translate, community in focus. And we also need to ultimately, if we are going to industry and attract industry, we should not go with a slipshod kind of data. We should go with a data which is at least strong enough. At least there is a proof of concepts in which industry could sink. It was not sinking money. So Dr. Bhan set up the BioRack, Dr. Mashelkar set up the Nimitli, so many structures were set up. So the funding, the TDB was set up in the DST. So some industry interaction happened, but still the Bay-Doles agreement, we couldn't get it through, which actually empowers scientists to set up companies. That is happens in the Scandinavian countries, in Sweden. And they are so good in translation. So we need to learn from these and we need to do these metrics and do translation.
Maybe like before we conclude, maybe the last question from my side. You did a lot of work in actually enhancing the public health capacity in the country, the teaching institute, especially ICMR and the Public Health Foundation of India coming together at, like around 10 years back to set up institutes. How far we could succeed in that process, and what do you think is the future of public health education in the country and investment that we require for that?
Yeah, actually, there's a very good question. When I joined ICMR, I didn't want to join it. I had left a lot of directors position where I was selected. I was happy where I was working. I wanted to remain a professor for my life and do my own work. Don't have to go to secretaries or ministers or others, and go on doing my work and enjoy the work and create students. That was my and so when this group selected me as an ICMR DJ, this was somehow they set up a very strong group. This was Dr. Sena Rao was the chairman of the group. Then there was Dr. Nityanand, Dr. Veliathan. Some strong giants were there, Dr. Mathan. So some very strong giants were there. So at that time, some or other, the system didn't want me there. So they had a fight for 8 hours till Dr. Sena Rao said that I will go out and call a press conference. So I got selected, and then I said that I don't want it. And then Dr. Sena Rao called me. He said that we will put a placard on your neck. Nobody will touch you again. So better you go and join. So I went and joined, and we had 29 institute and we had 29 crore budget, 1 crore for each institute. This was budget alone of CDRI, where I became research council chairman for 18 years. One single institute, and most of the ICMR institutes were working from different hired facilities. So one of the things I had learned that if you spend money, you can ask for more money. And secondly, that push everybody on in the pond, you will learn swimming. Either you will sink or you will learn swimming. So I started equipping it. I started making up science. So I found out a method of improving science in ICMR headquarters, which was really dismal. This was done by looking at, I found out that there are a lot of ladies. We need to have a gender equity also. There are a lot of ladies who had beautiful publications. They had PhDs, but they were stuck with their husband because they just couldn't get out and get to work. I found out each and every one of them and tried to bring them to ICMR headquarters. uh, they became a little bit of the file pushers. But then I used to tell them every morning. I used to take a meeting at 9. I used to tell them that don't say that I'm not a clerk, I'm not a clerk, I'm not a clerk. I'm a scientist and do science from here. And that actually worked. So we could equip, and there was spanking buildings everywhere. So ICMR stopped working from Hard Institute. We could restore funding. The time I left, it was 1,000 crore per year, the same amount as DBT and DST and others. Forced out a lot of international interactions, and ultimately created the Department of Health Research, which was not very easy, because before that, Dr. Ramlinga Swamy, etc., had failed because doctors fought with each other, they stopped each other. But some or other, because of my able to handle people and taking quick decisions, because only one thing, I took decisions which are atrocious. But because I didn't know any administration, if you really ask me. I was a head of the department of a research department, and um, neither knew anything about finance or anything. So spend the money intelligently, forge international collaboration, bought JICA money, many other monies over here, lot of capacity building, started FETP, which was, many of you are public health thing in Chennai, so that They were very good in during the time of the tsunami. They were very powerful and started a chain of MPH courses different whether it was nutrition, MPH, whether it was a vector related thing, where it was environmental or whether it was general, around India, about 12, and converted the PGI 1 to public health institute. The same when I was in Pondicherry, I was president. I tried to create one over there. So this was something which you do in building up capacities as well as building up institutes. Sometimes you may go through a rash and impulsive decision, but only thing it was that whether it is morally correct or not, whether I'm finding it is okay or not. If I thought it is okay, I did it. I never read the files. People just, because one of the things was there that ICMR DG used to make people wait for hours, sometimes 2 days, but the directors waited. So anyone, I pick up and I still pick up my telephone at any time of day or night, and I picked up that, and anybody even could, it really put me on a stress. You can open the door and enter, that they will be able to talk to me, and ultimately you could solve a lot of problems by enhancing the access to the people. So that was a method of work which I adopted. And now lastly, during the COVID days, one of the things which I did, apart from publishing again few papers on this, that published a lot of things in the in the newspapers, as well as talked a lot in the TVs, because I thought that we should have a third independent voice. Because when you are in the government, most things you say yes sir, yes sir. In ICMR, I never chaired a meeting in ICMR, because if I sat there, stopped going to any SAC meeting of ICMR institutes, because I will not get an advice. Everyone will say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. I wanted advice. So I have, during COVID days, what I have tried to give an advice which is little futuristic. So I was going through that, what kind of advice I have given. Every advice I had given, that was adopted by the government ultimately. Not even a single advice didn't go into use. I don't get a glory for that, or don't get a recognition for that. But someday when people will look at those articles and will look at those videos, they will know that at that time the policy was different. And I was able to say that. So you are a student up to the end of your days, till you are alive. I didn't know anything about the company. It was a scary thing for me. I'm talking to you using my computer today. So things change, and you need to change with that. And if you don't change, then you become dodo. And dodo, has to go extinct. So thank you. It was nice talking to.
Thank you so much, Professor Ganguly. I don't have any words to thank you, but let us say that this is not the end of our association. I think, and I am very sure that the younger generation has learned a lot from you, your presentation, and even me. I think the present generation also, and older generation like me also. So thank you so much for this creative interaction, and a huge thank you from me, Dr. Shafi, and all the participants. Thank you so much, Professor
Oh,
Ganguly.
I see Dr. Nair, Mohan Gupta's face there, name. We had a very good, yeah, now I can see his face. we we had a lot of good time. He was a public health face for ICMR, and he started that FETP course there in the Chennai. So, so if Mohan was not there, we could not have started this public health chain within the Indian Council of Medical Research. So he was he was the piano, I only, or he was the violin, I only tightened the strings. So you need to have committed people around that. So sorry, Dr. Gupta, I missed you while I was talking.
Actually, it was
But
his question
nice
on
meeting you.
public health education. He asked the question on that. I mean, public health education. So we posted to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ganguly. It was so pleasure to meet you and interact with you.
Thank you so much. I think the next in the series, let me announce that it will be Dr. Cherian Verghese, cross-cutting lead for non-communicable diseases and special initiatives, Department of Non-Communicable Diseases, World Health Organization, Geneva. So he will be next on 15th July, same time. Thank you so much, Professor Ganguly, again. Thank you so much.
Go on sending me the information. If I'm free, I will enjoy your series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.